Good morning. It's good to join you in this devotion. It happens now and then that a particular vista, whether it's an early morning sunrise over a mist-shrouded mountain or a spectacular sunset over a calm sea, can actually take your breath away. The scene is vision-like, and for a moment you're brought to complete stillness. No need to even breathe, or perhaps afraid to breathe, that the slightest movement of gentle breathing will cause the scene to evaporate. Now, Ezekiel was a brave man in many, many ways. One of them was that he attempted to describe in writing such an experience. Not just the overwhelming experience of beauty found in nature, but to describe the glory of God itself. But before he had a chance to write about it, he needed to survive the experience itself. I've just been reading in the first few chapters of Ezekiel, where he comes eyeball to eyeball, if that's possible, with the divine being. Not that it was intentional on Ezekiel's part. He was on a canal-side walk with a bunch of fellow exiles, kind of asylum seekers, just trying to survive a national catastrophe. Maybe it was the sight of a deep storm arising on the horizon and rapidly approaching that canal area that caused him to step away from the crowd and get a better view. But this storm cloud, with all its ferocious lightning lighting up the gathering darkness, was the outer rim of the presence of such immense glory that it leaves him on the ground and breathless. Turns out that he was actually in the immediate presence of God in an incredible vision. Fair play, when he got a chance later on, he attempts a word description of what he saw, and you can read it yourself in the first 2 chapters of Ezekiel. And along with thousands of others, you can have an attempt at drawing a picture or painting a painting based on his feeble yet inspired attempts to describe the glory of God. But what caught my attention is what followed. I'm going to read Ezekiel chapter 1, the last verse in chapter 1 and the first 2 verses in chapter 2 from the book of Ezekiel. It says, "Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. And he said to me, 'Son of man, stand on your feet, and I will speak with you.' And as he spoke to me, a wind entered into me, or a breath or spirit entered into me, and I heard him speak to me." Now, a careful following of those words don't entirely make logical sense. He hears someone speaking to him, but clearly he isn't really hearing someone speak to him. At least not until a breath enters into him, or is it a wind or a spirit, and then he hears. Now I know if you get the breath knocked out of you, then physically speaking, you can't speak because there's no air inside to make noise as it exits your lungs through your voice box. But it's not so obvious the connection between no breath in the lungs and the ability to hear. Unless, of course, the lack of air has knocked you unconscious, and in which case you likely will also lose the ability to hear. It needed the breath of God to enter into Ezekiel before he was able to hear the voice of God. And in these words, there are so many echoes of a more ancient story that takes us back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. I'll read from there. It says, "Then Yahweh, God, formed man from the soil of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life." Same word, breath, wind, or spirit. "And the man became a living being." And as the story in Genesis goes on to say, "And being alive, he could hear the voice of God." And that's what's happened to you. God has breathed into your very being, breathed his spirit, his Holy Spirit into your being. Not just making you alive, truly alive, but enabling you to hear the voice of God. I mean, really hear it, with the kind of hearing that does something about what God has said to you. And back to Ezekiel. The first words Ezekiel really heard was, Son of man. Another way of saying, my dear living human being, I am sending you. You can read it in Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 3. Specific instructions for Ezekiel in his context. Obviously different from our context, but instructions to Ezekiel as to what he needed to do that day. And so for us as well. We are no ordinary firstborn human beings. We are the twice-borns, Holy Spirit inbreathed, living children of God. We can now hear the voice of God calling and sending us. So let's head out into the day with the voice of God ringing in our ears. Now, don't be forgetful today. What was it that he asked you to do? God bless.